For my final project, I interviewed Francisco Javier Hernandez. Francisco is an entrepreneur, as well as the founder and creative director of Leí Leí. Leí Leí is a bilingual literacy and early childhood education system. It was created as a way to utilize current technologies and give Latinx children, especially ones growing up in Spanish-speaking households, the language learning skills they need so they don't fall behind in the English-dominated American education system. Francisco was inspired to make this app out of personal experience and drive, as he is a first-generation Mexican-American whose own educational development was impacted by his parents' lack of knowledge and understanding of the U.S. education system. Leí Leí itself started as his thesis project for the School of Visual Arts, Masters of Fine Arts, Designer as Author and Entrepreneur program. The program itself was focused on making a product that would be launched, but the end goal wasn't to make it an actual business. SVA's program is a good example of universities promoting entrepreneurship. Francisco received his first bit of mentorship from his SVA advisor, who was able to both steer the direction of his product, as well as put him in touch with other design and entrepreneur mentors. These mentors gave him feedback on what he was developing and opened doors to other institutions, including Columbia University and iZone, the New York City Department for Innovation in Public Education. It was through iZone that he was able to find the kinds of communities his app was geared towards in order to test it during the development stages. A major mentor for his product was Linda Holliday, a professor on his program who is also an entrepreneur and an angel investor. It was through her guidance that Francisco learned the importance of pushing his idea, building the product and the team, and sticking to his overall vision and mission. After SVA, Francisco applied and was accepted to the 30 Weeks program. This program, which at the time was run by Google and Hyper Island, is a founders program that transforms designers into founders who are equipped with the entrepreneurial skills, knowledge, and tech know-how to create products and start impactful companies. 30 Weeks is an incubator that provides startup mentorship, discussions with industry leaders, real tools, group critiques, hands-on help, a space to work in, and the time to focus on the product. While Francisco got some good insight on how to develop his product from the program, he left 30 Weeks before it was over, as feedback involved shifting the focus of the product away from the mission in order to increase marketability. Participation in the mission also was a financial hardship on him, especially considering the funding channels he pursued, which I will discuss in a moment. New York City is where the product was born, and there's an advantage of having it here. Access to educational resources, knowledgeable advisors, talent to help build the product, and supports for directing the product towards launch. As previously mentioned, the mentorship through SVA was able to connect Francisco to another educational institution, as well as the city's own initiative for spurring and advancing innovation in public education. However, there are limits to having the product be based in New York City, mainly in terms of funding and appeal. For the former, much of the feedback he had received from the 30 Weeks program was to go to places like Silicon Valley to try and solicit venture capital funding, as there is a more open culture there that is supportive of new tech initiatives. We have seen this type of advice repeat itself time and again in our readings. In terms of appeal of the places like Florida or Texas, which have the largest Latinx populations in the country, would have been better areas to launch, as the product would have direct marketability to these communities. Another advantage to New York City was the networks Francisco had at his disposal. The density of New York City means there is ample access to talented human capital for building a dedicated and productive team. These networks allowed him to solicit mentorship, as well as find people who he could bring together as his team for creating this product. Word of mouth was a good starting place for him, as his personal networks were already situated within the design and development sector. He was able to find his first team members just by reaching out to friends and acquaintances, discussing his product, and seeing who was on board with the mission and who knew of people that would be on board. Another important network for soliciting talent was the New York City Tech Meetup. Here, Francisco was able to not only discover a developer who knew the type of software he was looking to employ, but also had a personal investment in the type of impact this product was hoping to create. Francisco first got funding from SVA. He pursued their Deborah Buck Scholarship, which provides seed funding for initiatives within his MFA program. Originally, the scholarship was for $30,000. However, by the year he won it, he was only entitled to $5,000. He mainly financed the product by bootstrapping or using his own money, either through what he earned through his day job or raised from events and raffles he ran. He did launch a Kickstarter campaign. His goal was $15,000, but he only managed to raise about $6,000 through the platform and thus never received the money. However, the crowdfunding was never really about the money, but instead exposure for the product, as he could have used another crowdfunding platform like Indiegogo to raise any amount of funding needed. Venture capital funding would have been instrumental, but at the early stage where he had his product, he found by reaching out to venture capital investors and from advice he received by both mentors at SVA and 30 Weeks, the venture capital investors would not look at his product as it was just an idea. There was nothing built, no test cases, and no positive feedback loop on whether it was working. However, as he was working within the New York City network, it is unsure whether or not he would have had more success in the more open atmosphere of Silicon Valley. The final app was launched in November 2015 as a free app on both the Apple App Store and the Google App platform. Francisco promoted it mainly through social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and saw Facebook and Instagram garner the most engagement from app users. About 10 to 15 people daily signed up for and downloaded the app. One of the biggest takeaways Francisco learned from launching the product was that for any future endeavor, he would hire a digital marketing strategist to garner buzz around the launch of future products. He also learned how attractive a mission-focused initiative was in bringing together a cohesive and committed team. If your team believes in the idea, then they will be more invested in helping to see it succeed. Finally, his biggest takeaway was about initial funding and how important it is to have a good base of seed capital so we won't be operating under complete hardship, as the project was financially burdensome by almost completely bootstrapping the whole initiative. Also, this kind of work cannot be taken on alone, and a good network of mentors and team members helps figure out what's working and brings in new ideas and strategies. As we have seen time and again throughout this course, a good network was always stressed as adding to the success of a project or initiative. When considering all the areas Francisco used to his advantage, from his school to tech meetups, and how each contributed to advancing different aspects of his product, it further supports the important role networks continue to play in any undertaking. Additionally, undertaking this initiative had helped prepare Francisco for his current job within a startup, and he was able to apply some of the lessons to the company that he learned from his own entrepreneurship. His biggest lesson learned was to be solutions-oriented and not look to make a product and people will love it, but instead talk with people to find out what they want and work from there. Engagement, especially with parents and kids, was an important part of how he figured out whether his product was working and what needed to be changed. He also learned it was important to stick to his fundamental idea and follow his instincts, as he garnered more connections and interests by not compromising what he was looking to accomplish and create. In his current role, he also sees himself as shifting from entrepreneur to intrapreneur, as he creates ideas for products, marketing, how it works, user scenarios, and liaises directly with the CEO. Through this role, he's able to put together much of the product strategies used to court investors, as well as influence the direction of the startup. The lessons he learned from his own undertaking has helped him in working to develop strategies for his current job, showing how the successes and failures of startup initiatives can be learning experiences for the next entrepreneurial endeavor. Francisco is now re-exploring the app and ways to both update the content and increase profitability. As it was a free app to start, he envisions a model where updates and upgrades can be purchased in-store or in-app as add-ons while children are playing. This is a similar model to what he observed in other children's education apps. He also envisions maybe creating a suite of apps that focus on his original mission. Since his project is very mission-driven, he's also looking into pursuing grants to fund the next iteration of his ideas. Also, he's looking to potentially relocate to Texas. This relocation would have a twofold effect. It would be able to better garner feedback from the Latinx community there, and being a Texas native already, he has a good network within that community, and would be marketing to a larger target audience who would benefit from these apps. While Texas wouldn't have as many venture capital funding channels, though a city like Austin might be a good place for finding some, he would still be able to leverage his New York City network connection to help find that kind of investment as more apps are developed. Finally, he's figuring out whether he wants to develop these apps as standalone products or shift his focus into making them part of a benefit corporation dedicated to a social impact mission. Francisco's product was a great example of many of the ideas we discussed in class. His experiences highlighted the importance of strong networks, and mentorship and a startup incubator also helped provide feedback and direction on his initiative. Furthermore, much like Brad Feld discussed in Startup Cities, by SVA having an entrepreneurship program as part of its MFA, it is doing exactly what he had hoped to see: create a situation where entrepreneurship is promoted outside of a business school environment to help foster innovation. Finally, Francisco is able to learn from his experience and apply it to the next endeavor. Though he is currently working at a startup that he did not start himself, he is still able to provide some insight he learned from his own trials and errors to help this initiative grow and expand.